was enclosed in steel. Gun Captain Clayton Hartwig had shown the turret to his parents.
We looked at him and this is a death trap. If anything ever happens in here, none of us will ever get out alive.
The gunnery crew was aware of all these dangers on the morning of April 19, 1989, as the USS Iowa plowed through the waters off Puerto Rico. The Iowa was joining a training exercise, and on board was Vice Admiral Jerome L. Johnson, commander of the Second Fleet.
We pretty much got the ship all cleaned up and made sure everything was perfect for the Admiral's visit. And yeah, there was sort of a buzz going on because he was on the ship.
The gunnery crew was stirred up. The Admiral wanted to see an exhibition of the Iowa's firepower.
In my opinion, it was another dog and pony show. You know, some big dignitary comes on board and he wants to see the gun shoot, and we're going to give him a gun shoot.
Many of the crew were young sailors with limited experience.
And some of these jobs were very complicated. Even what you call a donkey job could get you killed. A guy that was just was a powder handler dropped the powder the right way, and he could blow up everything.
Up on the bridge, steering the ship, was a young officer who was usually assigned to Turret 1. Ensign Dan Meyer was surprised when he could not find a plan for firing the guns.
I was a little unnerved at that point that maybe we had been focused too much on the Admirals on board publicity side of the gun shoot rather than on the serious business of shooting guns.
However, the firing exercise began as scheduled.
Turrets 1 and 2 looked very smart. The guns came out over the rail and the firing exercise started.
But almost from the beginning, things began to go wrong. In Turret 1, acting turret officer Dale Mortensen fired his center and right guns, but his loaded left gun refused to fire. The center and right guns fired again, while his crew set about the dangerous task of repriming the loaded left gun.
Everything wasn't up to par. We weren't as fast as we probably should have been, and you know, the people up on the bridge were getting a little antsy.
Captain Fred Muselli went ahead and ordered Turret 2 to load its guns and prepare to fire.
That should have never happened because I'm in a misfire procedure. You must clear my gun before you go on and load another turret, unless we're in a war situation. We're not in a war situation, we're in peacetime. Okay? We're just out there punching holes in the water.
The left and right guns in Turret 2 loaded quickly, but something was wrong in the center gun room. Through his sound-powered phones in Turret 2's powder magazine, John Malahy could hear gunner's mate Eric Lawrence.
He said, "We have a problem in here, we're not ready yet, we have a problem."
Seconds later, Turret 2 blew up. This is actual footage shot from the bridge.
Front bloomers went off the turret. There was smoke on the front. Then you could almost see something spread inside the turret because the sight stations on the side started to emit smoke. And you could hear people. From the bridge, you could hear people screaming.
General quarters sounded, alerting the crew to man their battle stations. Next door to the explosion, the men in Turret 1 feared for the lives of their crewmates in Turret 2. They still had a loaded gun of their own, primed and ready to go off at any moment.
We're filling up with smoke. All of our ventilation ducts are just sucking the air in from outside, and it's just sucking the smoke in. And like Turret 2 just blew up. You know, I'm flying. I just, I don't stop, and this Turret 2 just blew up.
And then you heard another explosion, kind of muffled down below. Now my guys are listening to all the screaming and hollering going on next door, and they couldn't do a thing about it.
Up on deck, men trained hoses on the smoking turret and forced open the escape hatch to Turret 2. Brian Scania, a 19-year-old fireman, was the first to don a fireproof suit and breathing apparatus and enter the smoking inferno.
The walls, the floor, the ceiling, everything was burning. anything that could burn in there was burning, pretty much. The bodies, everything. I felt a sucking in my back, a bunch of air rushing past me, and probably about 5 seconds later, a fireball came up and threw me about 20 feet. I thought, I was dead.
Far down below him, fires ignited by the explosion threatened all 1,500 men aboard.
If we didn't get the fire out as quickly as possible, that we could have another explosion, and another explosion could possibly sink the ship.
And the loaded guns presented another threat to firefighters.
What's to say they don't cook off? If you got anybody on the main deck around that area, they're gone. It's going to blow them over the side. The flash alone will kill them.
It would take an hour and 20 minutes to bring the fires under control. When the flames were out, Dan Meyer and Dale Mortensen went inside the devastated turret. They could hardly believe their eyes.
There was something surreal about being in an environment where the human body was separated and in pieces.
Some people were burned beyond recognition. Some people were blown up. Some people had their clothes burned off. Some people were just laying there, not even burned at all.
By nightfall, the men on the USS Iowa would know that 47 of their crewmates had died terrible deaths. But the tragedy wouldn't end there. The Navy's investigation of the explosion would evolve into what some have called the most extraordinary cover-up in naval history. We'll continue with the USS Iowa explosion in a moment.
If you could accompany your data on this trip overseas, the experience would be alarming. Local carriers handing it to national carriers, over to cable carriers, until you don't know who has your data. Unless you send it through here, with the one and only company that owns the entire network, local, national, and international. So you know who has your data. OnNet from MCI WorldCom.
Going in a straight line is one issue, and most people, when they think of speed and power plants, think of the fact is you're going fast and slow, and you're turning in the process of doing it. The new Ultima has been redesigned with that in mind. We refined the suspension. We reduced the body roll. We goosed the engine. Technically speaking, we gave the car some
The video game signals the refrigerator and the robot dog brings it to me.
Timmy, did you get some help with your project?
Did I? I used digital DNA technology from Motorola.
Digital DNA?
Yeah. Their engineers came in during the concept stage. They helped streamline the board design. Chips, system, software.
If your company has an idea for smart technology, our company can help make it a reality.
I thought they just made semiconductors.
Digital DNA from Motorola, the heart of smart.
The web has more users in its first 5 years
than telephone did in the first 30.
A population
the size of the United Kingdom
joins the internet every 6 months.
One day the internet will make
long-distance calls.
The sing of the past.
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Virtually all internet traffic travels across the systems of one company, Cisco Systems, empowering the internet generation.
Are you ready?
Tomorrow on the History Channel, History's Mysteries investigates the impact of LSD on the 1960s. Then the real Papillon springs his trap on Devil's Island in Escape, followed by spectacular acts of demolition on Modern Marvel. It all begins tomorrow at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on the History Channel.
Dear Mom, here's your baby boy writing a letter from the battlefield. Is the saddest place I have been. Seen my first action, and it's horrible beyond words.
These are the words of ordinary people thrown into extraordinary circumstances.
I've seen and experienced things that I never dreamed of seeing.
These letters tell the story of World War II in a way no scholar or journalist ever could. Dear Home, Letters from World War II. Thursday at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on the History Channel.
We now return to the USS Iowa explosion. When the huge gun on the USS Iowa blew up, it was one of the worst disasters on a naval vessel in peacetime. The 47 crewmen trapped inside the gun turret never had a chance. The fireball burst out of the breech at about 2,500 to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It buckled the steel walls between the gun rooms and burst backwards through the turret officer's booth, killing everyone there. A firestorm flashed downwards. Gunpowder bags in the bottom of the turret ignited, sending poisonous gases upward to the projectile decks. The fires below triggered another explosion, which turned the turret into an inferno. Firefighters had to flood the lower levels and magazine of the turret to put out the flames. It wasn't long before TV helicopters began circling the Iowa, and news of the tragedy hit the airwaves.
The explosion occurred in a gun turret that is the most powerful the Navy has to fire. And today, during a test shot, something went tragically wrong.
In towns across America, families of the crew fearfully waited for word of their loved ones. Matthew Price was the right gun captain in Turret 2. His mother, Peggy, learned about the disaster from her neighbor.
She said, I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but Matt's ship just blew up. And I recall that everything just passed in front of me.
Gunner's mate Clayton Hartwig's mother, Evelyn, also learned about her son.
I just wanted to stop everything in my life right there when you hear your son is dead.
For Captain Fred Musali, the opportunity to show off his ship's firepower to a senior admiral had ended in disaster. The big question was, why had it happened? Although there was a professional naval investigator on a nearby aircraft carrier, he was never asked to come aboard the Iowa. A possible cause of the explosion became apparent to some of the crew as soon as they opened the breeches of the guns to remove the powder.
And I noticed there was only 5 bags of powder. There is where it made me wonder what in the heck was going on. 5 bags of powder, Delta 846 powder, they were using with a 2,700-pound projectile, and that's a no-no.
The normal load was 6 bags of a different kind of gunpowder. The Delta 846 powder wasn't supposed to be used at all with the large projectiles. That's because it burned too fast, creating pressure which could blow up the gun.
I wouldn't fire Delta 846 with a 2,700-pound projectile. They've tried it before, and I wouldn't do it. There's a warning tag right on the side of the bag. There's a tag right inside the cans. Not to be used with 2,700-pound projectile. So that shocked me.
They noticed that the rammer, the machinery that moves the shell and powder into the gun, had been thrust much too far into the barrel of the center gun. The danger of over-ramming was legendary among gunners.
The most horrifying fable of the battleship program was that if you over-rammed powder, it would explode and come back in your face.
But these were just theories, and unofficial at that. The Naval Command quickly appointed an officer to investigate. They chose Admiral Richard Milligan, former commander of the battleship New Jersey. To the surprise of many of his crew, Captain Fred Musali prepared for the Admiral by ordering the bodies removed and the turret cleaned up.
The next day was probably almost as bad as the first. Actually, people that had actually fought the fire and some other people from another turret were basically separating human remains from debris.
We shouldn't have had to go in there and remove our friends. We shouldn't have had to go in there and take these guys out of that turret. Professionals should have done that.
During this cleanup process, we were actually taking a lot of the evidence, which should have been preserved, and throwing it over the side of the ship.
Scanio took his own photographs of the turret. Though there was a state-of-the-art video and photography unit on board, they were never assigned to document the scene.
It's inexplicable why they didn't do it. And it's inexplicable why they didn't bring in the accident investigators.
The day after the explosion, the bodies were taken off the Iowa and shipped to Dover Air Force Base. A procession of caskets holding the 47 victims of the Iowa explosion were given a ceremonial military farewell before being sent home for burial.
It is our prayer today that they will go from here to their resting places, certain in the knowledge that a grateful nation will not forget.
The investigation into what killed these men was already underway. Admiral Milligan had come aboard the Iowa the day after the explosion. The Admiral seemed unconcerned about Captain Musali's cleanup efforts.
When Admiral Milligan landed on board, he looked around, went through turret 2, saw, I mean, it's pretty hard to miss 250 sailors, you know, with paintbrushes. And he said, okay, this is fine, and he let it go.
Admiral Milligan and a team of assistants began taking statements from selected members of the officers and crew. Some thought the investigators didn't seem interested in getting all the answers.
They only asked me the questions they wanted to hear. About every 5 minutes, they kept turning the tape off. And I'm like, you know, this is, to me, this is what I seen, this is what I heard, and immediately, to me, it looked like it was a headhunting crew.
They also wanted to rotate the turret and return the guns back to their original position.
They wanted me to train turret 2. If there was any way possible, I could get turret 2 back to center line. So we didn't pull into Norfolk, Virginia with the guns in the same position of the explosion. Well, I'm sorry. That's not going to happen. No, it could have been done, but I wasn't going to do it. No way. That's tampering with more evidence.
The wounded battleship arrived in Norfolk on the evening of Sunday, April 23rd. The entire crew was on deck in official mourning, clad in dress whites with black armbands. Hundreds of family members gathered anxiously on the dock. When the ship moored, they streamed up the gangplanks to be reunited with their loved ones who had survived.
Let me say to the crew of Iowa, I understand your great grief. I promise you today we will find out why, the circumstances of the tragedy. But in a larger sense, there will never be answers to the questions that haunt us. We will not, cannot, as long as we live, know why God has called them home.
The next day, President George Bush presided over a moving memorial service to the men who had perished on the USS Iowa. At a press conference, the captain defended himself.
You tell me who's at fault. You know, if I was in that turret, I'd know who was, you know, I would know what went wrong. Like I said, all the witnesses are dead.
The only crewman of Turret 2 who had survived had been in the powder magazine, next to but separate from the turret. The Navy presented one of them, gunner's mate 3rd Class Kendall Truitt, as a hero.
When we heard the explosion, we weren't sure that it was actually the gun firing or an actual explosion. It was a little longer than a normal gunfire would have been.
Later, the family of a man who had died on the Iowa, gunner's mate 2nd Class Clayton Hartwig, would meet with Truitt. He had been one of their son's closest friends.
I just hugged him and said, thank God that you survived, you know. And then after a while, Ken told us about the insurance policy.
Truitt informed the Hartwigs that their son Clayton had made him the beneficiary of a $50,000 double indemnity life insurance policy. The family was stunned. 2 weeks later, Clayton's sister, Kathy Kubasina, wrote Captain Musali and other Iowa officials asking for help. She wanted them to convince Truitt to give her parents the money. She said she knew her brother and Truitt had had a falling out.
But at the point that a letter came in from Kathy Kubasina, everything went badly wrong.
She had no idea that her letter would trigger alarm bells that would reverberate throughout the Naval Command.
And at the point they got that, according to the notes of a meeting that they had, they said, aha, and they opened a criminal investigation.
Confronted with a disaster they couldn't readily explain, the Navy seized upon Clayton Hartwig as a convenient scapegoat. We'll continue with the USS Iowa explosion in a moment.
Why is it that superheroes never have kids? Does changing diapers get in the way of fighting crime? Or could there be a simpler explanation? Maybe superheroes just have a hard time finding a family sedan that the bad guys won't laugh at. The Mitsubishi Galant, ranked the #1 family sedan under 20 grand by Car and Driver. Battle Eagle, bring the kids.
It's here. It's real. A way to combine voice, video, data, and internet we call Sprint Ion. Integrated on-demand network.
Can we see it from the south side?
Sure.
Great job.
But it's not just about how Sprint Ion will help you bring products and services to market faster. It's about facing your stockholders with a smile. Isn't that the point of contact?
Stamps again.
Ew. With eStamp internet postage, you can buy and print postage whenever you want. eStamp, postage when you need it.
All this week on the History Channel. Trapped, bound, on the run.
Bullets are flying through the trees.
Their plan was to attempt the impossible, to escape.
I'll take my chance, and I'm going.
Witness accounts of ordinary people who gambled their lives for freedom.
He did survive, and that in itself is a testament to the human spirit.
Escape. True stories of suspense. All this week at 9 Eastern, 10 Pacific, only on the History Channel.
You know, people still ask me about the crash. I'm tired of talking about the crash. I mean, first of all, it wasn't even really a crash. 1929. That was a crash.
Yeah, that was bad.
90, it was more like a market correction, typically defined by like 10, 20% drop in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which if you consider the economic factors that are affecting the current risk premiums.
When we created a smarter kind of investment firm,
I guess it's not that surprising.
we created a smarter kind of investor.
What do you know about expense ratios?
An expense ratio is a percentage.
Take the History Channel Yahoo poll. Here's this week's question. What was the most important invention in American history? Vote now at historychannel.yahoo.com.
We now return to the USS Iowa explosion. The deadly explosion aboard the USS Iowa left no witnesses to the cause of the disaster. All 47 men inside the turret died. Now their families and the nation wanted to know why. Naval investigators would soon offer up an answer. Alerted by letters written by the sister of dead crewman Clayton Hartwig, they were convinced it was an act of sabotage. And their suspicions focused on Hartwig and the surviving crewmate he had named in a life insurance policy. Admiral Milligan called in the Naval Investigative Service, the NIS.
They were running the backgrounds of everybody in the turret, and they found that Hartwig and Truitt had been investigated for homosexual activities, but they had both been cleared.
The investigators initially concentrated on Kendall Truitt. They suspected the insurance money may have provided a motive for murder. Kendall Truitt, the man the Navy had presented to the press as a hero after the disaster, now found himself and his wife Carol under intensive scrutiny by NIS agents.
They came to my home, they looked through my underwear, they read my high school yearbooks, they read letters that I'd written to my husband, they read letters that my husband had written to me, all very personal. They asked me questions about my husband and Clay Hartwig's relationship.
Investigators made it clear they were looking for a homosexual relationship between the two men. This despite the fact that Truitt was married and Hartwig had girlfriends.
I think a lot of it stemmed from the fact that neither one of us came back drunk all the time, and we could carry on an intelligent conversation without, having to talk about cars or just this or that. And we enjoyed each other's company.
Investigators concluded there was no way Truett could have smuggled a detonator up to the center gun from his position in the powder magazine. With Truett no longer a plausible suspect, suspicion now centered on Clayton Hartwig. The Navy's theory? That Hartwig and Truett had been lovers who had broken up. In an act of suicidal despair, Hartwig had triggered the explosion, taking 46 of his crewmates with him. Agents from the Naval Investigative Service called on the Hartwig family. They claimed they were there to help with the insurance matter.
They wanted to just look at Clay's room. Never once did they mention what they came here for. If for 1 minute they were going to say they were looking for criminal evidence against my son, they would have never got through the door. They had no warrant. They never explained to us why they were here.
The NIS agents went through Hartwig's things and took samples of memorabilia, pictures, and letters. They would later claim that a note he had written his parents after a Christmas holiday was evidence of suicide.
He just thanked us for being so good and all we did for him and the good time he had, and they took that as a suicide note, which was devastating.
They also interviewed Clayton's sister, Kathy Kubasina, and one of his girlfriends, pointedly trying to get them to say that Hartwig was gay.
Had my brother been gay, what would the difference have been? Being a homosexual doesn't make you a mass murderer.
Outraged that her brother, who had died serving his country, was being blamed for the disaster that killed him, Kubasina appealed to her congresswoman for help. Representative Mary Rose Okar began her own investigation into the character of Clayton Hartwig.
To me, just reading his thoughts and his letters to his girlfriend and some of the poetry or whatever that he wrote, I think he was just a sensitive guy who was so proud to be in the Navy.
She believed the Navy was making Hartwig a scapegoat.
I think the members of the upper echelon of the Navy really wanted to cover up for what was malfeasance on their part. And Clayton Hartwig was an easy prey to blame. He was dead. He couldn't defend himself. And it appeared that he had no one to come to his defense.
If the Navy was quick to blame the Iowa tragedy on sabotage, it may have been because the battleship program itself was under fire.
There were a lot of people on the Hill that were against those battleship reactivations. Now the Cold War's over, why do you need these battleships? Any excuse to say these old ships are dinosaurs, there's a safety problem.
To bolster its theory that Hartwig was responsible, NIS agents intimidated some of his crewmates. After days of pressure from NIS agents, sailor David Smith said that Hartwig had shown him a detonation device.
They kept pressing and pressing and pressing, and, you know, in my state of mind, I guess I panicked. I don't know. You know, I guess I agreed with them just out of, I don't even know why. You know, I really don't. Being up for 36 hours, I wasn't in the right state of mind. They came back and got me the next time, and I read this over, and, you know, I recanted the whole thing.
Even though Smith recanted his story, NIS included the damaging testimony in its report and leaked its entire file of unsubstantiated allegations to a reporter at NBC News.
And he opened his first broadcast with a picture of Hartwig and Truett, and then a chyron, it said special relationship, you know, which didn't take a genius to figure out.
Admiral Brent Baker was then deputy head of press information for the Navy.
Leaks always happen because somebody wants to send a message and put it into the agenda at that particular time.
That some disturbing facts have been uncovered about Truett.
In this case, Fred Francis of NBC being leaked some information, which at that time I didn't know where it came from, but now I know came from the Naval Investigative Service itself.
More leaks followed, including a damning psychological profile of Hartwig. The reports were picked up and widely published. Hartwig's surviving crewmates were stunned by the allegations.
Crew was in shock because we couldn't reconcile our knowledge of Clay Hartwig with what was being depicted primarily in the psychological profile.
It just, everybody just thought it was just a bunch of bull that the Navy made up, and they were, making up a scenario to fit the findings, to fit what they wanted to happen, basically.
Come on. Well, first of all, what else was they going to do? They threw half the stuff away. They cleaned it all up. They couldn't do any more.
There were reporters who were skeptical of the Navy's suicide sabotage story. Mike Wallace interviewed a crewmate who said Hartwig was preparing for a new assignment to London the night before the explosion.
I just can't visualize Clay killing himself, and not only that, but taking everybody else with him. It just doesn't make any sense, from the way I talked to him the night before, and he was really happy. He was writing a girl in England to look for an apartment and everything else.
Senior Pentagon officials say the Navy is deciding whether to...
Bob Zelnick, who covered the Pentagon for ABC News, also investigated and found holes in the case against Hartwig.
He wasn't on the duty roster for that final Iowa cruise. He wasn't even supposed to be working the middle turret. But apparently he was a last-minute substitute for somebody who was supposed to be working the middle gun. And that hardly amounts to the kind of premeditation that would have been necessary to commit this magnitude of crime.
But the Navy stuck to its story. Navy officials called a press conference to announce their official report blaming Hartwig for the disaster.
It is the conclusion of this investigation that the tragic explosion on board USS Iowa on 19 April was caused by a wrongful, intentional act. And that Gunner's Mate Second Class Clayton Hartwig was the most likely person to have introduced that detonating device.
The Navy even made a dramatized tape to help prove their case to the public. They claimed that Hartwig, as gun captain, stood right next to the open breech of the gun, where they said he could have inserted a detonator between two powder bags as the gun was loaded.
It comes down to the center gun captain, who is right behind the breech. The closest to the breech has the greatest access.
Experts at the FBI laboratory never found any evidence of a detonation device. Yet in their report, the Navy claimed the FBI tests were inconclusive and that their own lab had found foreign materials on the center gun projectile.
The Navy said it had evidence of a foreign device being inserted in the middle gun of turret 2. It never had any evidence of that. That was a fabrication.
Complete book of dirty tricks.
And what about all those leaked allegations of Hartwig's homosexuality?
That wasn't in our report because it was never substantiated.
And once it was out there, you could never clear their name. I mean, I can write 4 more books, and in the minds of the majority of the people, it'll always be 2 homosexuals. One of them was disenchanted and blew up the ship. It's sad. It's the accusation is stronger than the truth.
In the public mind, the Navy's accusation against Clayton Hartwig would stick like mud. But the actual case the Navy made against Hartwig would soon begin to unravel. And quite another answer as to what caused the tragedy on the USS Iowa would be revealed. We'll continue with the USS Iowa explosion in a moment.
Goes where you want it. Stays where you put it. The flexible shower massage from Teledyne Waterpick.
Bet I know where he's going. The Ace getting in the spirit sale. Ace is a place for the helpful hardware folks.
The video game signals the refrigerator and the robot dog brings it to me.
Timmy, did you get some help with your project?
Did I? I used digital DNA technology from Motorola.
Digital DNA?
Yeah. The engineers came in during the concept stage. They helped streamline the board design. You know, chips, systems, software.
If your company has an idea for smart technology, our company can help make it a reality.
I thought they just made semiconductors.
Digital DNA from Motorola, the heart of smart.
Sit down for a cup of joe with your insurance agent.
And you're back to where it all began. From the History Channel, the official network of every millennium, this is Time Lab 2000. It's 1687 and a coffee house near London's riverfront is becoming a popular spot for seafarers and traders. As a courtesy, the owner, Edward Lloyd, posts daily shipping schedules for patrons who negotiate funding for future voyages, an early form of insurance. These underwriters eventually buy the coffee house and turn it into a world-class insurance association. Today, Lloyd's of London is renowned for insuring the uninsurable. A film star